Hi everyone, what's up? So let's talk about a brand new silicon processing unit that Apple developed in-house that will control the most up-to-date Macs. I have some thoughts. So there have been many tech events, especially Apple events. This is where we were all expecting to see the first Mac Apple Silicon. I know right off the top, that's actually kind of niche as far as like who might be interested in that. But specifically for me, and maybe it's the nerd inside of me, this is the actual one I was the most excited for. So, for the first time in about 15, a long time, Apple's most up to date MacBooks and Mac Mini don't come with Intel processors. Instead, they utilize the brand new Apple M1 chip as a capable replacement for Intel CPU's numerous eras that have powered Apple computers since 2006. The M1 is the first appearance of the modern paradigm that Apple has named the Apple Silicon. The new Macs available for pre-order presently with the M1 incorporate the MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini. So let's take a look at everything about Apple Silicon in the Mac. The M1, an entire system on a single chip. Whether this silicon chip processor runs on Windows, Mac OS, or Chrome, most of today's PCs come with a cluster of computing components inside that each handle distinctive processing tasks. These incorporate one processor, the CPU, for taking care of fundamental computations, counting those used for browsing the web and opening and closing apps, and another, the GPU, for preparing graphics computations and yielding a signal to your monitor or laptop screen. On huge, powerful machines like workstation desktops and gaming rigs, the CPU and GPU are isolated items connected to the motherboard. Literal, ultra portable laptops ordinarily combine the CPU and GPU into a single component, utilizing what's known in the industry as integrated graphics processing. The rest of the computer's components, counting cache, memory, and storage, found completely different motherboard spots. As an advancement of the Apple A series processors that have long powered the iPhone and the iPad, the M1 chip takes a distinctive approach. Rather than collecting isolated handling parts, it's a single system on a chip, the SoC. The SoC tackles all of the computations, including graphics yield, which suggests that each computer program instruction can utilize the most productive part of the M1. In part, since it must do everything at once, the M1 has an eyebrow raising most extraordinarily of 16 processor cores. That seems like a ton compared with 6 cores in the most effective Intel laptop CPUs. In reality, the M1 has numerous such cores not to perform tasks more rapidly, but to perform more tasks. Four of the cores are computed centers devoted to complex calculations that require lots of processing power. Four more are devoted to light tasks that don't require as much control to guarantee that the chip doesn't consume more power than it has. Tasks get shunted to the suitable core set on the fly. AI and ML on chip. The M1 chip artificial intelligence and machine learning calculations are fundamental to helping modern programs run easily. Apple A series and Intel Core processors have long had AI capacities built in, and the M1 is no diverse. It contains a devoted neural engine with 16 processing cores of its claim to handle AI tasks. Have you ever touched up a photo using an automatic filter or looked over through a list of pre-populated searches that comes about? Both of these tasks and numerous others frequently rely on at least part of ML to run quicker. The M1's chip neural engine depends on instructions from the program to work appropriately. Many third-party software developers implemented AI and ML calculations into their apps, including numerous Adobe Creative Suite parts. Apple says that the new M1 powered MacBook Air can tackle ML workloads up to 9 times quicker than the past Intel powered MacBook Air. Are all M1 chips created equal? Whether a computer uses a single system on a chip or a collection of partitioned computing components, it's still subject to certain unbreakable computing and material science properties. The more cores a processor dedicates to a certain tasks, and the speedier each of those cores run, the speedier the task will complete. This process also creates a lot of heat, so most computers have fans, heat sinks, and other equipment. While Apple hasn't discharged many details yet, we know that there will be somewhat distinctive versions of the M1 for each of the diverse Macs its powers. It can be basically due to the reality that each gadget unexpectedly handles heat. The new MacBook Air has no cooling fan. And we do know that the M1 chip within the Air's base setup will feature a marginally less powerful design processor, with 7 cores rather than 8. Meanwhile, the bigger MacBook Pro and the MacBook Mini will come with cooling fans, which empowers their M1 chips to have full-power GPUs. The Mac Mini and MacBook Pro M1 forms may also have a higher clock speed than the MacBook Air's chip. How fast is the M1 chip? Agreeing with Apple, the M1 chip is speedier than the Intel processors within the Mac it replaces. In a few cases, the company claims it's much quicker. The general performance of the M1 MacBook Air is 3.5 times speedier than before, whereas the graphics performance is 5 times quicker, Apple says. On the M1 MacBook Pro, AI computation is 11 times speedier than before, and Apple says that it can construct code within Xcode app up to 2.8 times faster. Apple also claims that M1 powered Macs are quicker than their Windows counterparts. The company gauges that the modern M1 and the MacBook Air will be 98% of PC laptops sold in the past year. These claims are based on execution tests that Apple performed in-house, though the company isn't giving more details on them, but to say that they are industry-standard benchmarks. Will my apps run on an M1 Mac? A chip is only as great as the computer program that runs on it, and numerous Mac OS chips are planned to run on Intel processors, not the M1. Developers have a bit of a head start, as Apple advertised them a development kit this summer to help them interpret their code to the M1. But the truth remains that whereas the Mac OS working framework itself will run natively on the M1, numerous third-party apps will not, at least initially. The need for native M1 support doesn't mean third-party apps won't run at all, be that as it may. For apps that have yet to make the transition, Apple says the programs will still be able to run on the modern Macs through the company's Rosetta 2 computer program, which can act as an emulator. But don't be shocked on the off chance that the programs drag. The interpretation process takes time, so clients might see that interpreted apps launch or run more gradually at times. Apple wrote in the developer documentation for Rosetta 2. In the meantime, Apple affirmed that beginning with Mac OS Big Sur, all Mac software runs natively on both Intel and M1 frameworks. As an included benefit, iPhone and iPad apps can presently run straightforwardly on the M1 powered Macs. Big Sur will come standard on all modern M1 systems, and it'll be accessible as an upgrade for older Macs later. What if I wanted an Intel Mac instead? Whereas Apple Silicon is the long run for the Mac environment, Intel-powered Macs aren't going away overnight. The modern MacBook Air and Mac Mini utilize the M1 exclusively, but Apple offers the 13-inch MacBook Pro with Intel Core i5 or Core i7 CPUs as alternatives. And the other Macs in Apple's lineup, including the iMac, the Mac Pro, and the iMac Pro, and the 16-inch MacBook Pro, were not upgraded for the time being and are still only powered by Intel CPUs and, in a few cases, discretionary AMD GPUs. So that's all for today. Stay tuned for the reviews and we'll see how good the Apple M1 chip is. So either way, that's my thought. That's been it. Let me know your thoughts and your questions by leaving a comment down below. Catch you guys very soon in the next one. Peace. Thanks for watching Tech Factuala, where you can talk about the intersection of technology in everyday lives and business, and all things creative.